Have you ever wondered what it's like to wake up one day and realize you've lost everything that really matters? I mean, really ask yourself, what if the life you built, the success you chased, all turned out to be empty? Trust me, this isn't just a story about business deals or penthouses. This is about love, regret, and the moments that blindside you when you least expect it. Let me ask you, have you ever thought you were doing everything right, only to discover you were completely missing the point? Nathan Ashford thought he had it all: the big city view, the money, the respect, and the woman he loved. But all it took was one rainy night, one silent apartment, and one letter on a pillow to tear his whole world apart. I want you to feel this with me, because if you've ever taken someone for granted or wondered if it's too late to change, this story is for you. Stick with me, because what comes next just might break your heart, or maybe help you find your own. Believe me, you don't want to miss this. The letter inside didn't just say she was leaving. It forced him to confront a stranger in the mirror, a man he never meant to become. This is a story about a lifetime of regret, an endless search for someone lost, and the painful journey of a man trying to recover the part of himself he gave up for ambition. Let's get started. The rain poured down over Los Angeles in endless gray sheets, blurring the glow of traffic lights far below. From his perch 53 stories up, Nathan looked down at the city, not as a living, breathing place, but as a machine he'd learned to control by age 38. He was a giant in commercial real estate, his name etched into the steel and glass of LA's boldest new landmarks. Nathan was a living success story, written in stone, glass, and million-dollar contracts. His penthouse was the proof, a minimalist gallery of marble, chrome, and sharp lines. It felt less like a home and more like an art exhibit designed to radiate power and status. But Nathan was starting to realize that all this beauty was hollow. The silence had grown heavier each month, an invisible weight that even the city's noise couldn't drown out. The silence came from his wife, Julia Carter. He found her in the nursery. It was the only room that felt alive, a space painted in dreamy sky blue, with a mural of gentle, smiling dolphins swimming among stars across the main wall. Julia had painted every detail herself. Each star, each wave, spoke of her patient, quiet love. She was standing there now, back to him, one hand resting on her belly, 8 months pregnant. The painter called, Nathan said, his voice echoing slightly in the open living room as he walked toward her, loosening his silk tie. Rewritten content in American English, names, age, setting consistent with previous part. The knot in his tie was no longer a symbol of victory in another day's corporate battle. The painter called, Nathan said. The shade of white you wanted for the trim, Arlington lace, it's on back order. He suggested we just use pure white. I told him to go ahead, Julia replied, still not turning around. You should have asked me, Nathan. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried a gravity that seemed to shrink the spacious room. It's just white paint, Julia. It doesn't make a difference, he said, stepping closer. His hands almost reached out to her waist, longing for that familiar comfort, but he hesitated. There was a fragile tension around her, a force field of unspoken feelings he didn't know how to cross. It does make a difference to me, she finally said, turning her face toward him. The warmth and light that usually lived in her features had faded. Her large hazel eyes, once shining with open adoration, now seemed tired and sorrowful. Arlington has a softer, warmer undertone. Pure white is harsh. It's cold. That word lingered in the air between them, the perfect description for the apartment, for the city outside, for the growing space between their hearts. I'll call him back, Nathan conceded, a flash of irritation passing through him. It was just paint, after all. Why did she have to turn everything into something emotional? He dealt in absolutes, profit margins and blueprints. The intricacies of her emotional world were territory he'd long ago stopped trying to chart. Don't bother, Julia said, turning back to her dolphins. It's already done. Later that night, dinner was another silent ritual. Nathan scrolled through financial reports on his phone, while Julia slowly moved a piece of grilled salmon around her plate. He could feel her watching him, sense the weight of her unspoken words, but he didn't look up. What was there to say? He'd given her everything: the penthouse, the limitless credit card, the safety of his last name. What more could she want? I went to see Dr. Thompson today, Julia said, her voice finally pulling him from a spreadsheet about leveraged acquisitions. Everything okay? He asked, eyes still glued to the screen. The baby's heart is strong. He's growing perfectly, she said, but I need to avoid stress. Good, Nathan murmured, typing a quick reply to his COO. If you're overwhelmed, we'll hire a third housekeeper. A small, sad smile touched Julia's lips, a look he hadn't seen before, one that almost seemed like pity. That's not the kind of stress I meant, Nathan. He finally put his phone down, forcing himself to meet her gaze. What is it, Julia? What's wrong? Is it about the fundraiser on Saturday? If you don't want to go, we won't. I'll make an excuse. It's not the event, she said, her eyes filling with tears. It's us. You're here, but you're a million miles away. You look at me, but you don't see me. You're having a child with me, but I feel utterly, completely alone. Rewritten content in American English, names, age, setting consistent with previous parts. The accusation stung. It felt unfair. Nathan was working himself to the bone for them, for their future, for this child. That's not true, he said, his voice suddenly defensive. Everything I do is for you, for this family. No, Nathan, Julia whispered, and the certainty in her voice sent a chill through him. Everything you do is for the next deal, the next building, the next win. I just happen to be living in one of them. She stood up, leaving her plate untouched on the table, and quietly walked to their bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. The sound of the latch was as loud as a gunshot in the silent apartment. Nathan sat there for a long time, the pale light of his phone screen reflecting on his face, which was now set in a hard, resentful mask. He didn't understand. He had given her the perfect life. He'd built her a golden cage, filled it with every luxury, and still, she was unhappy. He picked up his phone again, letting himself fall back into the comfort of numbers and deals. That world made sense to him. There was a zoning problem in Westwood that needed his attention. He could solve that. It was a problem with a clear answer. He went to bed late, sliding under the crisp, high thread count sheets. Julia was turned away from him, a silent, unmoving shape in the darkness. He didn't try to touch her. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, the bitter taste of their unresolved argument still in his mouth. He'd make it up to her, he told himself. Once this big deal closed, he'd take her away somewhere, maybe to Hawaii. He'd buy her some new jewelry, something sparkling to distract her. He fell asleep thinking of solutions, the only way he knew how. He believed every problem could be fixed with a plan, a price, a strategy. He was wrong. Nathan woke the next morning to the harsh, cheerful sunlight of a city washed clean by the night's rain. But the silence in the apartment was different now. It wasn't heavy or oppressive. It was empty, a void. Julia's side of the bed was cold. That wasn't unusual. She was often an early riser. But the closet door was ajar, and there was a gap where her favorite suitcase had always been. A chill crept down his spine. "Julia?" he called out, his voice echoing. No answer. He moved through the silent apartment. The kitchen was spotless, untouched. The nursery door was closed. He opened it, half expecting to see her standing before the mural. The room was empty. The soft blue walls seemed to mock him. He walked back to the master bedroom, his heart thudding faster, and that's when he saw it. Propped up against the pile of pillows on his side of the bed. Rewritten content in American English, names, age, setting, consistent with previous parts. On his side of the bed was a single white envelope, plain, unadorned, with his name written in her elegant, familiar handwriting, Nathan. His hands shook as he picked it up. It felt impossibly heavy. He sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress sighing under his weight, and tore it open. Inside he found 3 pages written on the same thick, creamy stationery Julia always used for her thank you notes. Her handwriting filled each page, and in several places he could see the faint blur of teardrops that had smudged the ink. He began to read. "My dearest Nathan, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to do what I should have done long ago. I have left. Please don't try to find me. There isn't a private investigator or an army of lawyers who can help. I am not a puzzle for you to solve or a negotiation for you to win. I am a person, and I am gone. I used to love you with a fierceness that scared me. I remember the man I met at that tiny art show in Echo Park, the one who looked beyond price tags, who noticed brushstrokes, who asked me about my dreams instead of just my name. He listened. He saw me. I don't know where that man went, Nathan, but he hasn't lived in this apartment for a very long time. You've given me a beautiful cage, but I have been slowly suffocating inside it. You surrounded me with luxury, but you starved me of affection. You're preparing to become a father, but you've forgotten how to be a husband. Last night at dinner, I watched you, your face lit up by the cold blue light of your phone, and I finally understood. Your heart isn't here. It's out there in the skyline, in the next deal, in your relentless pursuit of more. I can't, and I won't, bring our child into this world of emotional poverty. Our son deserves to be more than just a future heir to a real estate fortune. He deserves a father whose hands aren't always occupied with a phone, whose eyes aren't always searching through contracts. He deserves laughter, bedtime stories, and a father who is truly present, not just physically, but in spirit. When I looked at you, I knew, with a certainty that hurt deep in my bones, that you could not give him that. Not now, maybe not ever. And then there's the other reason, the one that shattered my heart and bruised my pride. I know about Sabrina Lane. I've known for months, the late-night meetings, the unfamiliar scent of perfume on your suit, the transactional coldness in your eyes when you thought I wasn't looking. Did you think I was stupid? Or did you just not care enough to be careful? I think I know the answer. She belongs to your world, the world of deals and acquisitions. I suppose, to you, it was just another merger. But that betrayal was the final key that unlocked my cage. It wasn't only my heart you broke. You broke the foundation of our family before it even began. You broke the promise we made, and for that, I can never forgive you. I've taken nothing you would see as valuable. Only my clothes, my art supplies, and the child you helped create, but never truly tried to know. Don't worry about us. We'll be safe. More importantly, we'll be free. Maybe someday, you'll look around at your kingdom of glass and steel and see just how empty it is. Maybe you'll remember the man who loved art and dreamed of more than just real estate. Maybe you'll feel a fraction of the regret I have for what we've lost. Goodbye, Nathan. Julia. The pages slipped from Nathan's numb fingers and scattered onto the floor. The world seemed to shift beneath him. Sabrina Lane, it had meant nothing. Just a meaningless, stupid distraction. A transaction exactly as Julia had described. How could she put that on the same level as everything else? How could she walk away over white paint in a meaningless affair? The initial shock was quickly replaced by a wave of pure, raw anger. How dare she? He would find her. He would drag her back. He'd fix this. He snatched up his phone, thumb hovering over the contact for Ron Callahan, the best private investigator money could buy. This was just another problem, a bigger, more complicated one, but a problem all the same. He stood and stalked to the window, staring down at his city, his domain, but for the first time, it didn't look like a machine he'd mastered. It looked cold, indifferent, like a maze. He caught his own reflection in the glass. A powerful man in a multi-million-dollar penthouse. And behind that reflection, he could see the empty nursery, the pale blue walls, and the ghost of a woman who had seen him more clearly than he had ever seen himself. A shudder of regret, so deep it felt physical, ran through him. The anger started to curdle into something else, something cold and terrifying. Fear. He'd just lost something that didn't belong on any balance sheet. And for the first time in his life, Nathan Ashford had no idea how to get it back. The next 48 hours blurred by in a haze of controlled fury. Nathan moved through his routines with the ruthless efficiency of a man orchestrating a hostile takeover. Except his target was his own wife. "I want her found, Ron," Nathan barked into his phone, pacing the living room like a caged panther. The letter still lay on the marble coffee table, a constant, burning accusation. "I don't care what it costs. I want to know where she is, who she's with, and what she had for breakfast. I want her found yesterday." On the other end of the line, Ron Callahan, a former LAPD detective, calm and methodical, never impressed by Nathan's wealth, paused. "Nathan, this isn't a corporate espionage case. Rewritten content in American English, names, age, setting consistent with previous parts." "Ron," Nathan said, his voice a low, gravelly counterpoint to Nathan's hysteria, "she's your pregnant wife. She's a private citizen. She hasn't broken any laws by leaving." "She took my son," Nathan roared, his words echoing through the sterile emptiness of the apartment. "She took my son. She took her son. Ron corrected him gently but firmly. And from the sound of it, she left you a detailed explanation as to why. Have you considered that finding her might not be the answer right now? Just find her, Nathan snapped, hanging up before Ron could say another word. He didn't hesitate. He unleashed every resource at his disposal. He had his legal team monitor for any large withdrawals or credit card use. Nothing. He had his tech security expert, a wiry genius who commanded an outrageous retainer to keep Nathan's company safe from hackers. Try to trace her digital footprint. Nothing. Her social media accounts were wiped, her email was deactivated, her phone number disconnected. The digital life Julia had built as Mrs. Julia Ashford was methodically, expertly erased. A chill crept down Nathan's spine. This wasn't some impulsive, emotional decision. This was planned, carefully, maybe for weeks, maybe even months. While she'd been sitting at dinner, smiling sadly at him, she'd been plotting her escape. His second call was to Sabrina Lane. She answered on the second ring, her voice low and suggestive. I was wondering when you'd call. I've got the preliminary renderings for the Wilshire Tower lobby. It's over, Nathan said, his voice flat and cold. There was stunned silence. What? What are you talking about? We have a meeting tomorrow. Not the project, us. Whatever this was, it's over. Don't call me again unless it's about work. Nathan, wait, she started, her tone shifting from seductive to sharp. You can't just... He hung up on her too. Then he swiped her contact and deleted it from his phone, a hollow, symbolic gesture. For a second, he felt a fleeting, pathetic sense of accomplishment, as if deleting this one messy mistake could somehow undo the devastation. But Julia's words from the letter echoed in his head. Did you think I was stupid, or did you just not care enough to be more careful? The truth was, in those moments, he hadn't thought of her at all, and that was the real crime. Days turned into a week. Rewritten content, in American English, names, age, setting, consistent with previous parts. Ron's initial reports were thin, frustratingly so. Julia had withdrawn a moderate amount of cash, $10,000, from a joint account 2 weeks before she left. Enough to live on for a while, but not enough to draw attention. She had quietly sold some of her own jewelry, pieces she'd owned before meeting Nathan, through a discreet private dealer and took the payment in cash. She hadn't used her driver's license or passport. She hadn't purchased any plane or train tickets under her name. She took a cab to Union Station, Ron reported over the phone a week later. Paid in cash. We lost her in the crowd. She could have gotten on any train, any bus, or even just walked out the other side and hailed another cab. She knew where the cameras didn't reach. She's smart, Nathan. So find someone who saw her, Nathan demanded. We're trying, Ron replied. But she wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, in a city of 4 million people, all just trying to mind their own business. She might as well have been invisible. The power Nathan wielded so precisely in business meant nothing here. He couldn't intimidate a ghost. He couldn't threaten a memory. He started to come undone. He snapped at his staff. A multi-million-dollar negotiation for a prime piece of Century City real estate stalled because he was too distracted, too volatile. His empire, which had once seemed so solid and untouchable, started to show hairline cracks. He couldn't stand being in the penthouse. Every surface screamed of her absence. The half-finished painting in Julia's art studio, a wind-swept coastline he didn't recognize, stood as a silent monument to her abandoned life. Nathan found himself wandering into the nursery. The soft blue walls seemed to close in on him. He reached out, touching the painted dolphins, his fingers tracing the lines he had so often watched Julia paint. He had walked past her with a nod and a distracted smile, never really appreciating the love she poured into those walls. To him, it had just been decorating. To her, it was building a world for their son. One evening, unable to bear the silence, Nathan went to the bar at the Wilshire Grand Hotel, a place of crystal and quiet luxury where he'd often taken Julia for celebratory drinks. He ordered a Macallan 25, the expensive scotch doing little to numb the ache in his chest. As he stared into the amber liquid, a memory floated up. 2 years ago, their first anniversary. He had just closed the biggest deal of his career. He brought her here and gave her a diamond necklace, a string of flawless icy stones. She'd smiled, thanked him, and worn it that night. But later, as she took it off, she had said, "It's beautiful, Nathan. But you know what I would have loved? A picnic in Griffith Park." Just us. No phones. He had laughed it off. Darling, rewritten content, in American English, names, age, setting consistent with previous parts. I don't do picnics. I do this, Nathan had said, gesturing around at their lavish suite. Now, sitting alone at the bar, that memory hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't been listening at all. Julia had been speaking a different language, the language of connection, of simple moments, while Nathan only knew the vocabulary of business transactions and grand gestures. He'd been trying to buy her happiness when all she'd wanted was his time. A month after she disappeared, Ron finally called with a possible lead. A woman matching Julia Carter's description had been spotted in a small town in Northern California, buying art supplies. Nathan's heart leaped. Within the hour, he was in his car, a sleek black Tesla, heading north, frantic hope clawing at his throat. He drove for 4 hours, the city skyline shrinking in his rearview mirror, replaced by the rolling green hills of wine country. He arrived in the charming town of Willow Creek, a place with covered bridges and quaint, old-fashioned storefronts. It felt like another world. It felt like a place Julia would love. Ron had given him the name of the art supply store. Nathan walked in, the bell over the door chiming softly. An older woman with kind eyes and paint-stained hands looked up from behind the counter. Nathan showed her a photo of Julia, smiling on the beach at Santa Barbara, the sunlight tangled in her hair. The woman studied the photo. Yes, she said after a moment. A woman who looked like this was in here about 3 weeks ago. She was lovely, very quiet. She bought a lot of oils, mostly blues and grays. Did she say where she was staying? Where she was from? Nathan asked, his voice tight with hope. The woman shook her head. No, she paid in cash, but she did talk for a moment about the light. She said she was searching for a place where the light was just right. That city light was too harsh, too artificial. The woman studied him, her gaze perceptive. Are you her husband? Yes, Nathan said quietly. I need to find her. It's urgent. She's pregnant, Nathan pleaded. The woman's kind expression hardened a bit. Son, the look in that woman's eyes, it was the look of someone running from something, not to something. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is let them go. Nathan's hope collapsed, leaving him hollow. He thanked her and stepped out, the bell over the door marking his lonely retreat. He spent the rest of the day driving through the winding Northern California backroads, searching every passing face, every remote farmhouse, hoping for a miracle. There was none. It was a dead end. She had only passed through, a ghost moving on to somewhere else. Driving back to Los Angeles that night, defeat settled into Nathan's bones, cold and heavy. The frantic energy from the first days of the search faded, replaced by a dull, gnawing despair. The highway lights blurred around him, and every mile closer to home felt like sinking deeper into an unfamiliar fog. For the first time in years, Nathan found his hands shaking on the steering wheel, not from anger but from something rawer, closer to fear. He replayed every conversation, every detail he'd missed, haunted by the realization that maybe he'd never really seen her at all. He wasn't just losing his wife. He was losing his sense of self. The man who could solve any problem, who could bend the world to his will, was powerless. He returned to his silent, marble tomb of an apartment. For the first time, he didn't see it as a symbol of success. He saw it for what it truly was, a cold, empty museum of a life he'd failed to live. He noticed the unwatered orchid on the console table, its petals wilted and brown. Julia had loved that orchid. He had never once thought to water it. It was such a small, stupid thing, but in that moment, the dead orchid seemed like the perfect metaphor for his marriage. He had given the beautiful vase, the expensive apartment with the perfect view, but neglected to give it the one thing it needed to survive. Nathan collapsed onto the ridiculously expensive Italian sofa, not out of anger, but out of profound, soul-crushing emptiness. He stared into the darkness, his mind racing in circles that led nowhere. That night, for the first time since childhood, Nathan found himself afraid to sleep. He tossed restlessly, the city's distant sirens failing to drown out the echoes of his own thoughts. At dawn, he sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing at tired eyes, feeling more alone than he ever had in his life. The search was futile because he was looking for the wrong thing. He wanted to find her, her location, a dot on a map. But the real loss, The thing he had to find was something inside himself. And he was starting to suspect that maybe it wasn't there anymore. The failure in Willow Creek marked a turning point. The frantic outward search, fueled by anger and desperation, slowly burned itself out. What replaced it was a torturous inward journey. Some mornings Nathan would wander through Griffith Park alone, letting the chill autumn wind bite at his face. He watched strangers laughing, families gathering under trees, and felt a desperate longing for a sense of belonging he'd never known. The contrast between the warmth outside and the cold within him was almost too much to bear. Autumn leaves changed from green to gold to brittle brown, carpeting Griffith Park in a melancholy blanket. The city dressed itself up in festive holiday lights, but for Nathan, the cheerful glow only made the darkness inside him seem deeper. His professional life, once the bedrock of his identity, became unbearable. The thrill of the deal was gone. He'd sit in boardrooms, surrounded by men who spoke his old language of leverage and acquisition. But their words sounded like meaningless static. Nathan would stare out the window of his corner office at the skyscrapers he'd helped build and feel nothing but a hollow echo. He was the architect of a world he no longer wanted to live in. Nathan's business partners grew worried, whispering about his sudden distraction, his uncharacteristic lack of ruthlessness. For the first time, the Ashford empire looked vulnerable. Nathan stopped trying to fill the silence of his apartment. He let it consume him. He let go of 2 of the 3 housekeepers, craving solitude in his self-imposed exile. He began to see the penthouse through Julia's eyes. He noticed the cold, impersonal art he'd purchased as investments, not for their beauty. He saw furniture chosen for its brand name, not for comfort. He saw vast, empty rooms where laughter should have lived. His evenings weren't spent reading Ron Callahan's reports, which had dwindled to nothing, but instead with the ghost of his wife. Nathan began a new kind of search, not for her physical presence, but for her soul. There were nights he didn't turn on any lights, letting the apartment remain cloaked in shadow, as if hoping the darkness might let her spirit slip back in. The city noise outside felt far away, unreal, drowned by the thick quiet he could neither break nor escape. He sometimes caught himself murmuring apologies into the empty rooms, his voice sounding unfamiliar and fragile. He started in her art studio. The room at the far end of the penthouse had always been Julia's sanctuary. Sunlight poured in from a skylight he'd installed at her request. He used to think it was just an expensive luxury. Now he realized it had been her lifeline. Nathan ran his hand over her easel, the wood worn smooth by years of use. He remembered passing the door so many times, never bothering to stop, never asking what she was working on, always assuming he'd have time to see it later. Now that indifference ached inside him like a bruise. He looked at her canvases stacked against the wall, mostly landscapes, moody, atmospheric scenes of stormy skies and wild oceans. He'd always dismissed them as a hobby. But now he saw the raw, untamed emotion in every brushstroke. He saw her loneliness, her yearning for something wild and real, a stark contrast to the sterile, ordered life he'd given her. He stood there for a long time, unable to move, the weight of regret almost physical. He thought of his own childhood, a father always absent, a mother emotionally distant, a house filled with silence and expectation. Nathan had promised himself he would build something different, something warmer, but somehow had become exactly what he feared. The realization made his knees weak. On a small wooden desk in the corner, he found what he didn't even know he was searching for, a leather-bound journal. It wasn't a daily diary, but a collection of thoughts, sketches, and scraps of poetry pasted between the pages. His hands trembled as he opened it. Reading it felt like a profound violation, but he couldn't stop. It was the only way left to hear her voice again. The earliest entries were filled with light and hope that pierced him to his core. October 12th. Met a man named Nathan tonight. He has the most intense eyes, like he's always searching for answers. But when he looked at my paintings, he fell silent. He didn't talk about price or value. He asked me what I was feeling when I mixed the blues for the sky. I think I'm in trouble. Nathan had to close the journal, a sob rising in his throat. He remembered that night, remembered being struck by Julia's sincerity, a quality as rare as a flawless diamond in his world. He had been that man once. Where had he gone? The realization hit him with shame and longing so intense it bordered on grief. How had he drifted so far from the only version of himself he'd ever truly liked? He forced himself to keep reading, following the slow, painful erosion of her hope. March 4th. Nathan closed the Grand Crest Tower deal. He was electric, a force of nature. He bought me a Cartier bracelet to celebrate. I wish he'd just come home and we could have ordered pizza and watched a movie together. The bracelet is beautiful, but it feels so heavy on my wrist. August 21st, I told Nathan I was pregnant. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the man I fell in love with. He was stunned, then his eyes lit up. He hugged me so tightly. He whispered, "We're gonna have a family." I cried with happiness. Please God, let this be real. Let this change things. The next entry was dated 2 months later. October 30th. He's planning, not for the baby, but for the heir. He talks about trust funds, boarding schools, and which wing of the penthouse will become the children's suite. He hired a consultant to design the nursery. I told her I wanted to paint it myself. She looked at me with pity. I am becoming a decorative feature in my own life, in my own child's life. Nathan's chest tightened as he read her words. He realized with painful clarity that so many of his decisions had been about controlling outcomes and appearances, not about love, not about creating a home. He thought of his own mother's voice, cool and proud, reminding him as a child that love is a distraction. It was a lesson he had learned too well. The most painful entries were about Sabrina Lane. Julia never used her name, she was just her. February 11th, he came home late again. He smelled of jasmine and ambition, a perfume I've smelled before, on a scarf in his car. It's not just the betrayal of the body, it's the betrayal of the mind. He shares a world with her that I can never enter, a world of sharp edges and cold calculations. I think he finds it more exciting than my world of soft colors and quiet love. Maybe he's right. Nathan threw the journal across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud and fell to the floor. Pages splayed open. He was gasping for air, the weight of his own cruelty pressing down on him, suffocating him. He hadn't just been negligent, he'd been actively cruel in his blindness. He'd taken Julia's light, and ounce by ounce, he'd extinguished it. He buried his head in his hands, shaking. A wave of helplessness washed over him, a fear that he was broken in ways he could never fix, that he was trapped in a cycle he would never escape. For a moment, Nathan wished he could vanish entirely. Just stop existing, if only to be free from the pain of knowing what he had done. The baby's due date came and went in late November. Nathan spent the day locked in the apartment, drinking himself into a stupor. He imagined her somewhere, in a hospital, alone and scared. He pictured her holding their son for the first time. His son, a boy he had already named in his mind, Alexander. A strong name, a founder's name, he'd once told Julia. She had only smiled sadly and said, "I like Orion." Now he wondered what she had named their son. Was he Alexander or was he Orion? Not knowing was a unique kind of torment. The new year arrived, a time for resolutions, but Nathan had none to make. His only resolution was to finally understand. He picked up the journal again. The last entries were a chilling descent into hard-won resolve. March 18th. I can't do this anymore. I saw my reflection today and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were empty. My son kicks inside me, a vibrant, powerful life force. He deserves a mother who is alive, not a ghost haunting a penthouse. I can't let him be born into this gilded cage. He will not learn that love is a transaction and silence is a currency. April 5th, I've started to make a plan. It's terrifying, but the thought of staying is even more terrifying. So I am erasing myself bit by bit so I can be reborn somewhere else, for him. I will take him to a place with a wide open sky, a place where he can hear the ocean and feel the wind, a place where his mother's smile is real. The final entry was just one devastating line. April 29th. Goodbye, Nathan. I hope one day you forgive yourself. I don't know if I can. Finally, Nathan understood. This hadn't been an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. Julia hadn't run from him out of anger. She'd run to save herself and their child. The battle inside him reached its peak, the arrogant executive and the broken man locked in war. For months, he had mourned his loss, his pride, his shattered sense of control. But now, for the first time, he began to mourn for her. He mourned the pain he'd caused, the happiness he'd stolen, the beautiful, hopeful heart he had broken so carelessly. His regret was no longer just a selfish ache. It had transformed into a deep, empathetic sorrow. And in that shift, a sliver of light pierced the darkness he'd created for himself. The rage faded. The desperation faded. All that remained was a vast, silent ocean of remorse. He knew he had to change, not to win Julia back. He had lost that right forever. But to honor the man she had once believed he could be, Nathan picked up the phone. This time, he didn't call Ron. He called the director of his foundation, the charitable arm of his company, which he'd always treated as a tax write-off and a PR tool. "Elijah," Nathan said, his voice rough but steady, "we're making some changes. Big changes. Liquidate our stake in the Meridian project, all of it. We're starting a new fund, a grant for undiscovered artists, specifically young women. We'll call it the Julia Carter Grant." He was deconstructing his empire, piece by piece, and he was trying to build something Julia might have admired. It was too little, too late. Nathan knew that. But it was a start. It was an apology whispered into the void, a penance for a lifetime of mistakes. He was only beginning to understand. He wasn't searching for his wife anymore. He was searching for his own soul. The years that followed brought a slow, steady dismantling of the man Nathan Ashford used to be. It wasn't a dramatic, overnight transformation. It was a gradual, exhausting chipping away at decades of hardened ego. Regret was his constant companion, a shadow following him through the now quiet halls of his life. There were nights in the bungalow when Nathan would wake, heart pounding, unsure for a moment where he was. The silence pressed in from every side. No Julia's quiet laughter, no footsteps echoing down the hall, no faint music from her studio. The loneliness was so complete that sometimes he would reach for his phone and start to type her number, only to stop himself with a wave of bitter shame. He began taking long, aimless walks at dusk, hands deep in his pockets, letting the ache settle in his bones. He started by selling the penthouse. The decision shocked his business partners and even made the society pages that once chronicled his every move. To them, the Wilshire penthouse was the ultimate symbol of his arrival, the pinnacle of success. To Nathan, it had become a mausoleum of his failures. Every marble surface, every echoing hallway was a painful reminder. He sold it at a loss to an overseas investor, not caring about the money. He just wanted out. Nathan moved into a modest but elegant Spanish-style bungalow in Silver Lake, a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and a sense of history. The space was smaller, cozier, filled with wood and books instead of chrome and glass. For the first time as an adult, he lived in a home, not a monument to himself. He began systematically restructuring his company. The aggressive, almost predatory tactics that had made him a legend were phased out. He pulled out of deals that would displace longtime residents. He invested in green building practices, championed projects with community spaces and affordable housing. His old rivals called him soft. His COO, a man who'd once worshipped Nathan's cutthroat drive, resigned in protest. Nathan let him go without a fight. Profit was no longer the only measure of success. Now he was building a legacy that Julia Carter would not have been ashamed of. The Julia Carter Grant became Nathan's quiet obsession. He poured millions into it, not just his money, but his time. The man who once ignored his wife's art now spent weekends in dusty studios across downtown and Echo Park, talking to young artists. He learned to listen again, learned to see the world not as a balance sheet, but as a canvas of emotion and hope. In every earnest, paint-splattered young woman, he saw a piece of Julia. Still, even as he devoted himself to the grant, Nathan wrestled with the nagging feeling that nothing would ever be enough. He sometimes lay awake wondering if all this good, every scholarship, every smile, was just a self-serving effort to ease his own conscience. He feared that if Julia knew, she might see through him, see only a man running from guilt, not toward virtue. That quiet doubt was his nightly companion. He was funding their dreams in a desperate, maybe futile attempt to atone for having crushed hers. He never stopped paying Ron Callahan. The PI became less of a detective, more of a confessor. Once a month, they'd meet for coffee. The pretense of an active search long faded. The meetings had become a ritual of remembrance. "Anything?" Nathan would ask. The question now a hollow echo, more habit than hope. "Nothing," Ron would reply gently. "It's been 5 years. Her trail is colder than a morgue slab. She did a masterful job. She was masterful at everything she cared about, Nathan would say, a sad smile touching his lips. He no longer felt any anger at Julia's skill in disappearing, only a deep sense of respect. He never dated. Women were still drawn to him. The aura of power, though faded, lingered now, layered with a tragic romantic mystique. But Nathan was uninterested. It would feel like a betrayal, not to Julia, but to the memory of his own failure. Some nights, Nathan wondered if he was even capable of letting anyone else in. He'd try to imagine what it would feel like to move on, to start again, but the thought always left him hollow. Every casual invitation, every admiring glance, felt like another reminder of how much he had lost and how little of himself he had left to offer. His solitude became both a punishment and a strange kind of safety. He lived like a monk in a monastery of his own making, his life a quiet act of penance. He kept only a few mementos from his time with her. The half-finished painting from her studio now hung over the fireplace in his Silver Lake bungalow. The landscape of the windswept coast was a daily reminder of the world she had longed for. He also kept her journal, not to torture himself with painful memories, but as a sacred text, a guide to the man he was still trying to become. On especially quiet evenings, Nathan would take down the journal, tracing his fingertips over Julia's handwriting, searching for new meanings in words he'd read 100 times before. Sometimes he found comfort in the repetition. Other times, he was left aching, convinced he would always fall short of the hope she'd once had for him. One crisp autumn evening, 7 years after Julia disappeared, Nathan was at a small gallery in Echo Park, attending an exhibition for one of the first recipients of the Julia Carter Grant. The artist, a fiercely talented young woman named Isa Rowan, was giving a speech. "I wouldn't be here without this grant," Isa said, her voice thick with emotion as she stood before her large, vibrant canvases. "It's not just the money, it's the belief. The founder of this grant, who wishes to remain anonymous, gave me the freedom to fail, the space to create, and the encouragement to speak my truth through my work. It's a gift of presence, not just of wealth, a gift of presence." The words hit Nathan like a blow. It was the very thing Julia had accused him of never giving her. He stood at the back of the crowded gallery, a ghost in his own life, and felt a tear slide down his cheek. He had finally become the man Julia had needed, but 7 years too late. The applause was a distant roar in his ears. He wanted to disappear, to slip out into the cool night air and be alone with his thoughts, but he stayed, partly out of duty, partly because something in Isa's words held him captive. Later, as the crowd thinned, Isa approached him. "Mr. Ashford, thank you for coming. It means the world to me." She knew, as all the recipients did, that he was the anonymous founder. "Your work is extraordinary, Isa," he said quietly. "You have a powerful voice." "I had a good teacher," she said, smiling. "My mentor. She's the one who encouraged me to apply for your grant. She's an artist herself, though she rarely shows her own work these days. She always says her masterpiece is her son." A strange stillness came over Nathan. The hum of the gallery seemed to fade. "Your mentor?" he asked, his heart suddenly pounding. "Yeah, she's amazing." Isa gushed, unaware of the storm rising inside him. "She lives up in Oregon, in a tiny town on the coast called Cannon Beach. She moved there years ago from back east. Her name is Julia Carter Vance." The world spun. Vance, Julia's mother's maiden name. Oregon, a tiny town on the coast, the windswept landscape in the painting above his fireplace. The pieces he'd chased for 7 agonizing years slammed together in one blinding, beautiful moment of clarity. Isa was still talking. "Her son, Orion, is the sweetest kid. He's about 7 now, the spitting image of her. Orion, not Alexander, Orion." Nathan could hardly breathe. A rush of emotions, shock, disbelief, terror, and an overwhelming joy so intense it hurt. She was alive. She was okay. She had a son, his son. "Mr. Ashford, are you all right?" Isa asked, her face suddenly full of concern. "You look as white as a ghost." Nathan swallowed hard and forced a nod. "Yes, I'm fine. Just a bit overwhelmed by the beauty of your work," he managed, giving her a weak smile. "Excuse me, I need some air." He slipped out of the gallery and onto the cool Echo Park street, his legs unsteady. He leaned against the old brick building, gulping in the night air. After 7 years, 2,555 days of regret, he had an answer. A location, Cannon Beach, Oregon. The old Nathan would have been on a private jet within the hour, descending on the town with a team of lawyers to claim what was his. He would have made demands, asserted his rights, torn apart Julia's peaceful world out of his own need for reunion. But he wasn't the old Nathan anymore. He stood there on the sidewalk, the city lights blurred by tears, and faced the true test of his redemption. What do you do when you finally find what you've mourned for a lifetime? He knew he had no rights. He'd abandoned them in a storm of neglect and betrayal. To show up at her door would be an act of supreme selfishness, destroying the peace she had fought so hard to build for herself and their son. His penance required one final sacrifice. To truly love her, he would have to let her go. Even now, knowing where she was, he could not, would not be the storm that wrecked her beautiful windswept coast. But he had to see his son. Just once. He had to see the boy whose very existence had reshaped his own soul. Nathan would go, not as a father, not as a husband, but as a ghost. He would see, and then he would disappear, leaving Julia to the life she had chosen. It was the only way to prove he had truly changed. The only way to finally forgive himself. The flight to Portland was the longest 3 hours of Nathan's life. He flew commercial, wedged into a window seat in coach. The anonymity was oddly comforting. The man who'd once crossed the country in a private jet, now just another face among strangers, watching America pass below him, knowing nothing of their lives. From Portland, he rented a nondescript sedan and drove west toward the coast. The city sprawl gave way to dense forests, the air cooler, scented with pine and salt, as he neared the ocean. The sky opened up, a vast moody canvas of gray and silver, just like the skies in Julia Carter's early paintings. Nathan felt as if he were driving straight into her art, into her soul. Cannon Beach was even more beautiful and understated than he'd imagined. Weathered cedar-shingled houses nestled among windswept trees, art galleries, and cozy independent bookstores lined the main street. In the distance, the iconic Haystack Rock rose out of the mist, a silent, ancient guardian. This was the world Julia had chosen for herself. A world of nature, art, and quiet community. It was the exact opposite of his glass and steel penthouse back in Los Angeles. Nathan didn't know what he was going to do. He had no plan beyond seeing, beyond observing. Each night in the motel, he sat by the window and listened to the sound of distant waves, his thoughts circling endlessly. His hands shook when he held a cup of coffee in the morning. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so afraid. Part of him wanted to run, to drive back to Portland and pretend he'd never come. But the other part, the part that knew this was his final reckoning, kept him rooted there, waiting for a glimpse of the life he'd lost. He checked into a small, unremarkable motel at the edge of town, using a fake name. For 2 days, he existed as a ghost. He wandered the misty beaches, the cold sand crunching under his shoes, watching the waves crash in their eternal rhythm. He was terrified he'd see her, and terrified he wouldn't. From the friendly owner of the local coffee shop, he learned there was a small community art fair at the town hall that weekend. The whole town comes out for it, the owner told him. Even Julia Carter Vance usually puts a piece or two in. Her work is incredible. Keeps to herself mostly. Her and her boy, Orion. Lovely people. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest. Her and her boy, Orion. The day of the art fair was overcast and windy. Nathan wore a simple jacket and a baseball cap, keeping his face in shadow, his heart pounding in his throat. As he walked to the town hall, he rehearsed a dozen scenarios in his mind. What if she saw him? What if Orion recognized him? Each possibility seemed impossible, unbearable. He nearly turned back twice, only to force himself onward with the single thought, "You owe them this much. You owe them your respect." The town hall was warm and bright, filled with the murmur of conversation, the smell of cider, and a riot of local creativity. Handmade quilts, intricate pottery, and vivid photographs of the coast. And then he saw it. In a quiet corner, away from the main aisle, a single large canvas. It was unsigned, but he'd know those brushstrokes anywhere. It was a painting of Haystack Rock at sunrise, but the true genius was in the foreground. On the beach, a small boy with a mop of dark curly hair held his mother's hand. They were painted from behind, 2 small figures, gazing out at the vast beauty of the world. It wasn't just a landscape. It was a portrait of love, of safety, of a world complete in itself. Nathan's breath caught in his throat, the room spinning a little as he took in every detail. For a moment he forgot why he'd come at all, forgot his own name, his own failures, lost in the undeniable proof of the happiness she'd built without him. Nathan was so absorbed he didn't notice the small child darting past him laughing, or the voice that called out, "Orion, slow down." It was her voice, older, richer, but still unmistakably Julia. Nathan's blood ran cold. He froze, gripping the edge of a display table for support. He forced himself to turn, slowly, carefully, and there she was. She was more beautiful than he remembered. The years had been kind to her. There were new lines around her eyes, but they were lines made by laughter. The weary sadness that had haunted Julia in Los Angeles was gone, replaced by a calm, self-possessed serenity. She wore simple jeans and a worn wool sweater, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She was radiant. She was whole. And next to her, clutching a cookie, stood the boy from the painting. He had Julia's hazel eyes and gentle smile, but Nathan's dark, curly hair and the determined set of his jaw. He was a perfect, heartbreaking fusion of them both. He was Orion. Orion looked up, and for a brief, random second, his eyes met Nathan's from across the room. It was like looking at a ghost, a life Nathan might have had. The boy, of course, saw only a stranger, and quickly turned back to his mother, tugging on her sleeve. Julia laughed, a sound so pure and beautiful it broke Nathan's heart all over again, and knelt to wipe a smudge of chocolate from her son's cheek. In that simple, maternal gesture, Nathan saw a universe of love and contentment, a world he had no part in and no right to disturb. For a moment, Nathan's breath caught. His chest ached with longing and an odd, bittersweet pride. He wondered if Orion ever asked about his father, if Julia ever spoke of the life they left behind. Did the boy know how fiercely he was loved, even by a man who could never claim him? The question pressed heavily on Nathan's heart, but he forced himself to accept that some answers weren't his to have. This was it, the moment of truth, the final test of his 7-year penance. He could walk over, he could say her name, he could shatter her peace and throw a storm of confusion and pain into his son's life, or he could leave. In those few seconds, Nathan felt the full weight of every choice he'd made, the good intentions, the selfish mistakes, the love that had twisted itself into regret. He wished, fiercely, that he could go back and do it differently, but there was no way to undo what had been done. All he could do now was let Julia and Orion keep their happiness, uncomplicated, untouched by his ghosts. He looked at her, really looked at her, one last time. He saw her happiness. He saw the beautiful life she had built from the ashes of the one he had destroyed. And he knew, with a certainty that was both devastating and freeing, exactly what he had to do. His redemption wasn't in being with her. It was in loving her enough to stay away. As he turned to leave, Julia's head lifted as if she sensed a shift in the room. Her eyes scanned the crowd, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even recognition on her face. For one heart-stopping moment, their gazes locked across the crowded room. He saw a flash of confusion, a slight widening of her eyes, a tilt of her head as if trying to place a familiar ghost. There was no anger, no fear, just a spark from a long-forgotten past. Nathan held her gaze for a single silent beat. He gave her the smallest, almost invisible nod. It was an apology, a farewell, a blessing. Then he turned and walked out of the town hall, out of the art fair, and out of her life. For good. He didn't look back. He got in his rented car and drove away from Cannon Beach, the image of his son's face and Julia's peaceful smile seared into his memory. His lifetime of regret was not over. It was a scar he would always carry. But as he drove back toward the airport, a deep, quiet peace settled over him. For the first time in 7 years he had lost his wife and son, but he had finally found himself. He had become a man worthy of their memory, and that, in the end, was its own kind of salvation. Before Nathan left Portland, he did one last thing. He called his lawyer and arranged for the creation of an anonymous, irrevocable trust fund in the name of Orion Vance. It was a small fortune, enough to ensure Orion would never want for anything. There were no strings attached, no way to trace it back to Nathan. It was a final, silent gift from a father his son would never know, a ghost's provision. At last, Nathan whispered, "I'm sorry." Nathan Ashford's story isn't about getting the girl back. It's about the devastating consequences of taking love for granted and the agonizing, lifelong journey toward redemption. He lost everything he thought he didn't need. only to realize it was all that ever mattered. His journey teaches us that real change isn't about grand gestures to win someone back, but about the quiet, painful work of becoming someone worthy of the love you lost. It's a raw, honest look at regret, and the difficult truth that some mistakes can't be fixed, only atoned for. Absolutely, let's talk about the big life lessons from Nathan Ashford's journey. And honestly, if you're still here with me now, I know there's something in this story that touched you too, maybe in a way you didn't expect. So let's look at it together, just you and me, like friends figuring out life after the story fades. What Nathan's story shows us is that real happiness and connection are never found in what you own or achieve, but in the love and presence you give. It's about the risks we take when we chase success at the cost of what matters most, and how sometimes by the time we realize it, it's too late to get those moments back. Maybe you felt it too, the regret of words left unsaid, or love taken for granted until it slips quietly out of your life. But here's the deeper truth, one that matters for all of us. Healing doesn't come from big, dramatic gestures or rewriting the past. It comes from facing yourself honestly, owning your flaws, and having the courage to change who you are moving forward. It's the quiet, patient work of making yourself worthy of love, not to win someone back, but simply because it's right. Nathan's journey is raw, it's honest, and it hurts because it's so real. But it also reminds us that even after the worst heartbreak, there's still hope for redemption. As a favorite quote from Heterodox Wisdom says, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Rumi. So if this story moved you, even a little, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Tell us in the comments, what part of Nathan's story hit closest to home for you? Who would you call, or what would you change if you realized today was your turning point? Because maybe, just maybe, the real gift is knowing it's never too late to start again. Thank you for being here. And remember, healing starts with a single, honest step. Let's take it together.